New York native and legendary St. John's basketball head coach Lou Carnesecca passed away on Saturday at the age of 99. Carnesecca, who would have turned 100 on January 5th, coached the Johnnies for 24 years, winning 526 games. So let's talk about the life and impact of one of the greatest coaches in college basketball history and New York sports history. We're going to do that with the great Mike Vaccaro, sports columnist for the New York Post, who joins me now. Mike, how are you doing?
I'm good, Dexter. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Had a good Thanksgiving weekend. Obviously saddened to hear the news about the great Lou Carnesecca. But Mike, St. John's is synonymous with Lou Carnesecca. So how would you describe the program's transformation under his leadership, and what were some of the key moments that defined his legacy at the school?
Well, obviously the most shining moment was their trip to the Final Four in 1985. But, you know, really what Lou Carnesecca was a real gadfly, a basketball gadfly in New York. Everybody in college and high school basketball knew who he was, had a relationship with him. That's how he built his program. You know, he would always get 2 or 3 of the best city kids a year on his team every year, and that's how he built the team year after year after year. You know, as college basketball was exploding, he used to joke, "Why do I need a private plane? All I need is a pocket full of subway tokens, and I'm good to go." And he really built his program that way. And look, I mean, he brought St. John's from a simple mom-and-pop operation into a Big East power at a time when being a Big East power was the biggest deal there was to be in college basketball. That all happened under his watch. He never lost fewer than 17 games in a year. He won, over 500 games at St. John's, and his name is going to be remembered. Forget the fact that he lived on this earth almost 100 years. He'll be remembered another 500 years by anybody who cares about St. John's and basketball in New York City.
Yeah, his name will live on forever in the world of college basketball in New York City, as you said, indeed. And Carnesecca, he had an unparalleled influence on college basketball during his tenure. What do you think made his coaching style so unique, and how did it set him apart in an era filled with coaching legends? There were a lot of them, but he was one of the unique ones, too.
He was, and he was really a player's coach before you really had that term for it. The players loved playing for him. He understood that he was only going to go so far as the players he recruited and the players that he coached up. And he was the guy who always gave credit to the players before even thinking about saying anything smart he did on the sidelines. You think about all the games he coached, you never can think of one time when he got into an ugly confrontation with a referee or an opposing coach or an opposing player. It was always about his team, his players, and making sure his players were in the best position to win a game. And when you talk to those players long after they played for him, they talk about the impact that he had on them, not just as basketball players, but also as gentlemen, and how he taught them so much about how to properly behave in a professional environment. And that's really what he was his entire career at St. John's. He was a gentleman, but he was also a fierce competitor, and he burned to win. But he wasn't going to do it at the expense of his dignity or the dignity of St. John's.
Great point there. And I want to get back in a second to something you just mentioned about his impact on the young men that he coached. But first thing I wanted to say is, when I think of Carnesecca, I always think about his sweaters, right? And his iconic sweaters became a symbol of his personality and his coaching career. So what do you think those sweaters represented about the man behind them, and how did they embody his connection to St. John's and New York City?
Well, at the very beginning, it was just a simple thing that his wife was afraid that his cold was going to turn into pneumonia one winter's night in 1985. So she dug into a drawer, found the ugliest sweater that she probably had in her collection, and gave it to him. And that sweater was a good luck charm for a number of weeks during that great run of theirs to #1 in the nation in '85. And then it became kind of his trademark. He kind of toned down the gaudiness of the sweaters after a while. That's a bad example right there. But for the most part, he toned down the gaudiness of the sweaters. But that became who he was, and he kind of became known as the guy in the sweater. And he didn't mind that, even though, I think to a degree, sometimes it might have taken away from his genius as a coach. And he was a very good coach. I mean, he was a great X&O guy. He was a great recruiter. He understood the game better than just about anybody. But for a whole generation of basketball fans in New York, he was the guy in the sweater on the sidelines for St. John's.
Yeah, he absolutely was. I like those sweaters. So some people might say they were ugly. I liked it. It was good style. I like those for sure. Now, you mentioned this, Mike. Many former players will credit Lou for shaping their lives beyond the basketball court. So how do you think he was able to connect with players on such a personal level, and why did his mentorship resonate so deeply with those players?
Well, he was a city kid. His father was a deli owner. His parents were immigrants. He really related, I think, to players in a way that maybe not a lot of other college basketball coaches might have had they tried to apply their wares in New York City. But he was a New York guy, New York through and through. He'd gone to St. John's, and he worked there. He'd gone to St. Anne's, which later became Archbishop Malloy, and he worked and coached there. He talked their language. He understood their backgrounds. He understood, the playground. He understood that there was a unique element to the New York style of playing basketball. And I think if you're a New York kid, you wanted to kind of express that New York your inner New York basketball, there was no better place than St. John's, because Lou Carnesecca was a guy who appreciated that brand of ball and was able to bring out the best of it.
Last thing for you, Mike, somebody who has covered sports in New York for many years, what's your most cherished memory of Lou Carnesecca? Is there a particular story, a moment that encapsulates who he was as both a coach and a person?
Absolutely. The very first time I actually met him, obviously I grew up, following his teams, rooting for his teams, rooting for him. But it was when I came back to work in New York around 1999 or so, I was doing a press conference at St. John's, and I went up to introduce myself. We talked, and of course he was incredibly nice and generous. And I said, I used to go to your basketball camps when I was a kid, and I felt compelled to tell him I wasn't a very good player. And he smiled and he said, "No, I know that, because if you were, I'd remember your name." So, and he smiled, and of course that was completely disarming and put you at ease. And that was everything you need to know about Lou Carnesecca. He was a genuine man, a gentleman, and you just enjoyed his company. And right to the end, I had the good fortune of having a conversation with him on the phone last February, and it was just like, I talked to him any of the previous 30 years that I knew him. He was just a genuinely nice man, a humble man, and a guy that he just enjoyed talking basketball, talking about New York, talking about the Knicks, talking about baseball. He was a great baseball player in his day. Just a wonderful ambassador for New York, for St. John's, and for the city game. And he's going to be greatly missed.
He will be greatly missed indeed. A great man. Lost for St. John's, and our thoughts and prayers go out to the Carnesecca family as Lou Carnesecca passed away at the age of 99 this past Saturday. That is Mike Vaccaro. He has a great column up on nypost.com about the life and career of Lou Carnesecca. I encourage everybody to check that out. Mike, appreciate talking to you. Thank you for the time so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dex. Good talking to you.